whole idea was that US military bought location data from a Muslim dating app that then was used to locate and identify targets.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't even consider that. Again, I sometimes forget this fact. Data is so powerful. It's literally information about the human being that you are, your profile, essentially. Hi, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Surfshark Wave podcast. I'm your host, Gvidas, and before I get into the show, let me say that these episodes are available here on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Now, our guest today is Darius Belejevas, who is the Chief Business Development Officer here at Surfshark. So tell us, how are you doing today?
I'm doing quite good, thank you. Great to be here.
Nice. It's nice to have you. And I was curious about your title, Chief Business Development Officer. As I understand, you and your team work on making new products in the cybersecurity space. So tell us more about your everyday job.
Sure. So commonly, CBDO role is more associated with sales and partnerships. For us here at Surfshark, we take the developing business part quite literally. We are essentially like an R&D for new business ventures within cybersecurity and privacy. And talking about our day-to-day, so right now and for the last year or so, our main focus is Incogni. It's been essentially building it from scratch, and yeah.
That's awesome. We'll talk about Incogni in just a bit, but let me introduce today's actually topic, which is something that you're familiar with, is data collection and data brokers, and the problem of online data collection in general. So I think, again, you're more than anyone is familiar with that topic. So tell us more about the issue of data collection.
It's a great question, and I think it's important to know that when we started out on this sort of like journey about a year and a half ago now, I think myself and the team, we really didn't know like how deep the iceberg goes and the problems associated. We just knew that we are sort of on the road to solving a problem for our users. And talking about specifically the data collection, there are good parts about it, but there are also countless issues. And in terms of privacy and what's important for our users, one of the main concerns is that in most cases, ourselves, as users, as internet netizens, actually don't know what's going on. And there are hundreds of thousands of companies that have our personal information, our behavioral information, and these are the companies that we've never heard about. I think that's not all right.
Oh, yeah. And again, we use the apps and internet every day, and there's I wouldn't even think that there's collection going on. Now, I have a personal story that I'm going to tell you. And, just like anyone, I've been installing apps on my phone, on my desktop computer. I've been playing video games for a while. And it's actually a funny story that my first experience with data collection was actually in a single player game. And again, focus on single player. It's not an online experience. And I remember the game was asking me to agree on their privacy policy, which included data collection. And I was baffled. I was like, why do you need my data? It's a single player game. Again, I think when most people think of data collection, they probably... some of them probably think of crash information, where the app asks you, are you okay with sending your device info, which is not identifiable, to our developers, which can, again, later on improve the product and things like that. But in our everyday lives, there's still a ton of things going on where you go on a website, you get a pop-up saying, hey, cookies and stuff, and additional collection. So there's constantly things just taking our information, which could be extremely identifiable, and maybe we can talk about a bit more about that. So what's your opinion on data collection in general? Because in my eyes, in my view, there's, there can be a positive thing where, again, the product improves, we're doing better, and there's also this privacy aspect, which is super concerning.
I'd love to get to that, but one question before that. In that single player game, did you read the privacy policy? Why the data has been used?
So this is something that I do every time. So hey, I'm just gonna come out and say it. I don't read the privacy because the thing about those privacy notices and those policies that you get upon signing up, and every company does this. Like when you're installing Windows, you get this huge one, this huge list of things that you have to read about. And let's be honest, like most people don't read that stuff. And I'm just gonna come out and say I don't do that either, because it would take me like an hour to read it. And again, going back to the video game aspect, there are games that actually bring up like this huge list. And if it's a new game that's coming out, I'm like, I just want to play the game. Like, I don't care. When you're installing the app or anything that you want right now, you're not going to want to read an hour-long book, essentially, to use the product. I just want to use it right now. So that's my take on it.
And I agree. I don't read most privacy policy. Actually, I have been reading more privacy policies lately because it's something we need to do kind of for the work, for the job. But of course, there's a legal aspect where companies need to cover, but there's no rule why those privacy policy needs to be like so convoluted, so extended, why they don't have a sort of like TLDR version.
I think most people would say that it's more for legal reasons, because in my eyes, when I read legal things, it's usually like written in very constructive, very like well put together words that to me, like a regular person, they don't mean anything. It's just like, what is this?
Exactly. But at the same time, it's not that you couldn't have like 5 or 10 like bullet points with like most important information. But I think one of the reasons why it's not happening is because I think many people would actually be freaked out if they see a sort of like just a short version of what data is being collected about them. Yeah. And at that point, you would go like, okay, maybe I actually don't need that app.
Oh, yeah. So you're saying that privacy policies could literally be a TLDR version, like?
I think again, we would need to check with our legal department. So, but yes, they do need all the aspects that they have, and there are actually like important areas. But if you would just take the whole document and just highlight the most important parts for the user, it's technically, it could be possible, but I think the nuance, missing the nuance and so on, I think actually a lot of people actually would be freaked out.
And I think that's a good point to bring up, that I think we here at Surfshark, we make our privacy policy like super digestible. It's something that we did, I think, a while back, and I think more companies should do that. And going back to data collection and stuff, I remember in 2015 when Windows 10 came out, a lot of people were freaked out because Windows and Microsoft wanted to know so much about you. There was literally spying in the Windows OS. And it's still happening today with Windows 11. We actually are making a video about that right now, where we're going to talk about the privacy aspect of Windows 11, the Microsoft latest OS. And there's still a lot of stuff going on where they want to know your media activity, like what movies you watch, like that kind of thing. And again, that for me creeps me out, And maybe you could share your experience where you experienced data collection where you thought, okay, this is a bit too much, which maybe even inspired you to create the product that you're working on today.
Not from the top of my head, like in like very specific cases. That said, since started working on Incogni, so a couple of things that I actually started doing. So I developed a habit on mobile phone when browsing. I actually click advanced options and object all, and actually going through those flows to object. And in certain cases, I will actually go in and read the sort of like most important points for me in the privacy policies. But I can't recall from the top of my head something that like would freak me out specifically.
Data brokers. Let's first introduce data brokers. What is a data broker, and what exactly are they doing?
Right. So data brokers are companies. companies that generally collect a lot of information. And I think the aspect that's most important here is that the information collected often happens without users knowing consent, meaning that as a user, I, for example, don't know that these companies have my information. So they have it. Somehow they know my name. Sometimes they have some behavioral information. They might have my email address, but I've never heard about it. So that's one aspect. And another thing that's important here is that this information is then being used and can be traded. So first, there's a set of companies that I've never heard about have my personal information, and then we don't know what they're actually doing it and to whom they are selling, to what entities, and not to get like full paranoia. But it's a scary thought.
So in a way, it's a whole again process for them, but it's like a whole network where. And my question is again, you spoke a little bit about what type of information they collect, and this can include like your full name, your email address, your home address, gender, phone number, education, your IP information, social security number, employment history. There's so much stuff out there on, I presume, servers just laying around. And one of the things that I'm kind of afraid of is, I don't know if you know the saying of whatever is on the internet stays on the internet. I don't know if you know about that. So if you upload something on the web, it will be on the web forever. So, and for me, that's a scary thought in terms of data collection, because if I sign up for Facebook or whatever social media site and enter my, my birth date, name, whatever address, maybe even, that information is going to stay on those servers. Now, I'm going to just predict, sort of speculate that these data brokers, they get their info by web scraping. Is that correct?
It's one way, especially when it comes LinkedIn is quite popular to be scraped.
And maybe we could talk a little bit about what web scraping is essentially. Maybe you could tell us.
Right. So when it comes to web scraping, I think one misconception and important to understand is that in general, it's not illegal. And again, it probably needs some sort of asterisk in terms of jurisdictions. And there's also nuance to not illegal when it's available publicly. And then it depends what sort of information, et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of legality is difficult to give a very clear answer. But the whole mechanics is where you have automated tools that essentially imitate the user, and usually they will be configured to collect certain information from your name or employment address, etc.
And just this is completely, all this process is done completely without your consent.
Yeah,
they're not going to send you an email saying, "Hey, I'd like to have your address, and by the way, I'm going to take your address. I'm going to take all your information. Thank you very much. Bye-bye."
Yeah, if you're getting an email address, it's going to be a salesy or scam email later on when that information is then being used, in potentially not your best interest.
We'll get into that in just a bit, maybe. And I guess you do agree that there should be some kind of consent. A letter, an email sent to you if this is being done. Is there at the moment legislation to stop the web scraping?
One thing to note, I'm not a web scraping expert, so please take everything with a sort of grain of salt. But yeah, I think a month ago or so on, there were quite a bit of controversy in terms of an attempt to make web scraping illegal. And you would think, oh, that's probably a good thing. But then you see who's driving the agenda, and apparently it's the people who are currently owning the data and just don't want to share it.
I have a question about the money part, because obviously there's money to be made. Now, could you tell me, is this a big industry, data selling?
Last time I checked in terms of the data, and I think it was from 2018 or something, it's 200 billion.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a big industry.
That is, yeah. If there's money to be made, people are obviously going to, grab onto it. And obviously, web scraping is one of the ways that they get the information. And you mentioned there's another way. What's the other very common way of data brokers trying to get that info?
Every time you visit the page, you will get the sort of consent form when most people accept all.
Oh yeah, yeah. Everybody says like accept. There's a new website. I'm just gonna click accept, accept, accept. I just want to get to my content. Nobody. We actually talk about this is maybe a bit off topic, but we talk about on our channel here on YouTube about the topic of privacy versus convenience, where you sacrifice a lot of your privacy for convenience. And people do this all the time. I think if we all wanted to be super private, we would be using, a VPN, and we'd probably be using also, operating systems like Linux. We wouldn't be just, giving away our information as easily, but people do it because it's convenient. So maybe you could now get into the aspect of why is this dangerous?
There's multiple aspects to the dark side. There's multiple shades of gray here. And I think let's start with one of the risks is that when you have companies that have a lot of data about a lot of people, the result is that they kind of put a sort of like target on their back in terms of very malicious agents trying to acquire it. And we actually did a research last year, and we went through a list of 500 data brokers and cross-referenced with what data breaches have happened in the last, I think, 8 years or something like that. And what we found out, so out of 500, 30 have already been breached. So it might not seem like a sort of like super concerning number, but a few things to add here. So some of those companies have been breached actually multiple times already. And the biggest sort of factor is that like the average data breach size is over 100 million data points.
That's a lot. That's a ton of data.
You're already like putting thousands and thousands, maybe billions of people in danger when you have this information. And then, let's say, among those data points, there's your name, there's your address, there's your email address, there's, in some cases, and it's quite extreme, there's your social security number. That's the kind of information that, in the hands of malicious agents, can then be used in identity theft and other kinds of fraud. I think another important part, and this usually goes to the sort of argument that, well, I don't mind that marketers know what I'm browsing.
I was going to bring that up because, similar to how, we preach about using a VPN and things like that, there's always going to be people who say, oh, I've got nothing to hide. Like, it's everything, I don't care, just leave me alone. And I think there's going to be part of people who say, listen, if there is, a data broker, and they might look at a data broker as sort of a bridge between, a company that sells stuff and to your information, so that they can later on, that company can sell you things that are relevant to you. And that kind of brings up that convenience aspect that you're paying with your privacy to have maybe an offer for better car insurance or a better deal for maybe groceries, whatever. So what's your take on that?
I would say that it really is a matter of personal preference. So we do have different comfort levels in terms of like advertising and what information is available, and that's perfectly fine. Personally, for example, I really don't mind some retargeting ads because I visited some e-commerce store and now I'm seeing like pictures of shoes everywhere I go. So, and like for me, like my own background is in digital marketing, so for me it's a sort of like, oh, I don't mind it. But there are segments of the population where this kind of behavioral information can really be, I would even say, weaponized. Let's say, imagine that we have a company that acquires like big data sets of behavioral information. They might not even know like your name, but they have enough information to be able to target you with various kinds of advertising. And looking at those data sets, they identify that you're showing patterns for addictive behavior. So what happens when this kind of segment is then being targeted with, say, ads for gambling or predatory loans, or essentially when your human weakness can be used against you?
I definitely can see that. And even there's, I think, a term in the video game world where for mobile games, there's a term called whale,
Yeah.
where a person will spend like every cent on microtransactions for a game. And I feel like if you have that addictive personality, like you just said, and you get ads for like a new game, once again, it could just drain your wallet, essentially. So that is definitely an aspect to consider.
A few more examples in terms of like this area. So let's say you acquire information that contains behavior data and in some cases maybe health information, and you start getting ads for fake diets and gym routines and stuff like that, where actually you're being targeted because like within the data it shows that you have like body dysmorphia, and again it's something that's being used against you and well, monetized. Another aspect that we found multiple cases of fraud is when it comes to the elderly, because maybe our generation, we have a bit higher BS filter for digital activity.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But I know when, like, even I speak with my grandma or even my father, my mother, you know that they can take a lot of the information quite literally. And again, having like age date is quite common among the data sets. So you can target specific advertising when you can take advantage of that information.
Now, we spoke about advertising, but I see a potentially huge issue where this data, especially if you got your email, your first name, last name, I see a big window for scamming. I mean, think about it. If I have your first name, last name, and your email, a potential phishing attack could happen where I could tell you, oh, hey, I know that you work at this company. Click on this website, and hey, now I have your company's password. I mean, I could, that's a huge issue. Does that happen? Is data being used for scamming?
Absolutely. You can find some case every few months talking about your thought about like phishing and when you have like personal information. So in United States, there's a popular segment of like data brokers that refer to people search sites. And in some cases, they also have like your relative information. So now imagine that information weaponized when you get a letter or you get a call and, hey, I'm calling from your aunt and now she's sick, and like there's a lot of information you can collect that can be used against people.
And again, it's just baffling to me that this info, a potential scammer can contact data broker. Hey, like, I need this information, and they can just get it.
It varies company for company. So I think it's important also when we're speaking about data brokers that like not every company is the same. So there are organizations that are actually taking quite good care, and we've worked with companies that actually go beyond what the law requires in terms of like data removal and stuff like that. So yeah, it's important not to put them in the sort of like same bucket, but it's a spectrum. And on one end, we have companies that, well, it's a legal business model, and they're leveraging it. And as long as that information is not being used against people, I think it's perfectly fine. On the other side of the spectrum, we do have cases where essentially everything's being done to discourage users from exercising their rights.
Okay. And before we move on to another question, I was also wondering, do you know of any cases where the government is trying to get hold of this data in order to control the people
So it's there was a case a few years ago, and I might be a bit vague on some details, but the whole idea was that U.S. military bought location data from a Muslim dating app that then was used to locate and identify targets or something along those lines. So it's definitely happening. I think there are quite a few more cases like that, and I don't know if we have show notes, but maybe we could add a few links there.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't even consider that. Again, I sometimes forget this fact. Data is so powerful. It's literally information about the human being that you are, your profile, essentially. And just the thought of the military using it for, to find potential targets, that's a crazy story. And if we find it, we'll actually put it in the description below in the show notes so you can find it.
We actually have a separate document where we just collect all those not so fun use cases.
Okay, all right. Maybe you can link me that afterwards,
Yeah.
after the show. And now let's get into the solution. And that's where you come in, obviously. The solution is Incogni. And so tell us what you guys do at Incogni and how do you combat this huge issue of data collection?
Right. So, in a sort of very simple terms, what Incogni does is that we automate the data removal process for the user from data brokers. What this means, sort of like practical terms, is that user signups. They provide us with the information in that essentially whose data we need to be removing. They signed that sort of like authorization form to make sure that we are allowed to do that. And right now I think we have 127, maybe 130 or so data brokers that we address. And we deal with the process of data removal on their behalf.
That's great. So you guys are essentially fighting the fight against these data brokers. Now, I want to know, aren't you afraid? Because, like you spoke about, it's a huge industry, $200 billion. These are big companies.
They are.
We're talking big companies. Are we talking like, again, not like the size of Microsoft or whatever, but these are huge companies. And is there a fear factor for you guys?
Not really. In a sense that all we're doing is enabling users to exercise the rights given by GDPR in Europe, CCPA in California, PIPEDA in Canada, and emerging laws that hopefully, some of them are confirmed within the United States as well. So I believe like the law and the truth is on our side. So at the same time, we do get all sorts of emails to deal with. I think we're in the right here.
So essentially, you guys, you might be the underdog, but you're carrying the power, the sword of law, basically. And now you mentioned emails. Did you get emails? Could you, maybe there was like, obviously, I can imagine that these emails are like, a hate mail, essentially, which is translated in nice words like, could you shut down your operations? Is this something like that you guys get? What kind of emails do you get exactly?
We get some of those, and sometimes it's all caps.
Really?
But most often, it's more about legal threats and stuff like that.
And I assume that's why, this has been happening for a while now, data collection. And Incogni is the first product that I seen that does this. And that's why I admire what you guys do. And this, what I'm sensing from you, this energy of, doing the right thing, it's quite remarkable. And I appreciate that a lot.
Maybe I can just make a small correction here. So we're not the first in general. Like we do have our own way of doing things, but there are companies that have been doing this, I think, since GDPR came out. I don't know the whole history here, but I think no one at this point like reached the scale and really leverage to create like a proper solution. And to be fair, there's a long roadmap for Incogni as well. There's to really get a firm grip on this problem. And I think what we're also seeing is that companies like ours, there will be more.
Now, I have a sort of a question about the difficulty. Maybe before that, I will say that I've used Incogni myself, and you guys make it stupid simple. It's so easy. It's like you guys give like a nice progress bar. Everything is super simple, and you guys start sending out and doing the dealing with the data brokers. That's really cool. My question is, how difficult was it in the research and development part to launch a new product like Incogni? What kind of difficulties did you guys face?
I think specifically for Incogni, the biggest sort of difficulty is that it's not just a technical problem, it's not a legal problem, it's not a business development problem, it's all of the above. Like you really need to combine, and like in terms of difficulty, removing yourself from one company, like using GDPR or let's say CCPA, it's generally not that complicated, even on the sort of like dark spectrum of like dark patterns that really go overboard, and we've seen some ridiculous cases here. You can do it in a sort of like reasonable time. What happens is when you try to do it at scale, and even if you take like a few dozen of those companies and you start making the requests, then they come back to you. Well, we spoke about the legal sort of strength and like if emails we're getting. The reality is that, well, the users we have been getting these kind of emails themselves, and what we're seeing is that oftentimes they are intimidating in a sense that...
So the user will get an email from the data broker after you guys started your process.
It's very rare now, but sometimes they might be able. In some cases, they will claim that they need to confirm that the user really.
Okay.
But I was more speaking about doing it manually. So let's say I like go and to my Gmail and find out some data broker, go to their privacy policy, find their link to whatever form they need to fill in, or like email address where I need to send. So you do that, then you get another confirmation address, like email. Then we start seeing the various aspects in like trying to discourage you. And again, important to say, not everyone is doing. We've seen some very great flows. We've seen companies that actually improve their flows based on our feedback. So not everyone's in this corner, but there's this sort of side where you get like 2-page legal document where it says like, okay, so now send me your ID, utility bills, birth certificate.
So the point is that if you wanted to do it manually yourself, like actually remove data yourself, it would take a long time.
For one company, quite easy. When you start doing it at a larger scale, it becomes a sort of full-time job.
Wow, do you think that there should be a change in the law itself to sort of not have to do this?
Absolutely. And again, the privacy laws, they are still quite young. There are a lot of areas where still there's no precedent set. So in terms of like, okay, so what, like both laws have like proportionality elements to them, so that your request for identity verification needs to be proportionate to the request. What is proportionate? And now we're starting to get these sort of like clarifications, and a lot of this right now is even happening as we're pushing, and we're also making those inquiries to the data protection agencies and to see, okay, so where we really stand. And as those sort of like issues are becoming glaringly obvious, there are amendments, there are propositions being made to improve those laws. So I think we're on the right track. At the same time, I think it's still a long way to go because there's a lot of money involved. I might be a bit skeptical about whether we have the political will to actually execute it, to create like privacy laws that are actually like user first. And
I want to go back to one previous question that I asked, just the issues of launching a new product. And I thought about it, and you also have to deal with obviously you need a website, you need the legal team, you need this and that. And before all of that, on the marketing side, you still need to educate people. There's that education barrier where you need to sort of sometimes convince people, right, that this is a problem. And at the moment, Incogni is its own thing. But since it is brought by Surfshark, do you see a potential merger with Surfshark happening, Incogni plus Surfshark together? Because at the moment, you can purchase Incogni from the Surfshark website.
Some sort of bundling might be on the table, but in terms of like our systems and everything's like involved with that, I don't think that's happening simply because the privacy problems that we are solving, they are quite different. So for example, for Incogni to work, we do need some personal information. So just so we know that like whose data we need to be removing.
True, yeah.
At the same time, it might not necessarily be something you want with your like Surfshark being like provider.
That's true. Yeah.
So there are some aspects to it. So I think architecturally, the backend, the databases will need to be separate.
Okay, and maybe for current customers of Incogni, you could share what you guys are working on right now. Not necessarily features, but maybe you guys are making the website easier to use and things like that.
Absolutely. So when we started out, for the first year, our goal was to build a working service, because there's no products that are really like markets defining in this area. There are a lot of aspects where you don't necessarily know how to best translate this information, how to best present it, what's going on. And now with our users, we actually have this information. So a lot of the focus in the upcoming months. So one, we're constantly on the lookout to find and add new data brokers to remove from different systems, to expand like the scope of what what personal information we're able to remove from those entities. But another aspect is a lot about quality of life, UX and UI changes in terms of like creating remarkable experience for the user, that it's really clear what's going on, the progress being made, and everything's involved with that. So like the next 6 months, maybe more, will be really focused on that. Like,
and at the moment, Incogni is available via web app or website. Are you guys working on an application for devices? Because I think maybe for mobile devices, it would be nice to have an app where you can just open it up, see what's the progress with various data brokers. Are you guys working on that?
Not right now. I think whether we will need to develop an app specifically will depend a lot on our user feedback, what we're seeing from the users. But at the same time, if it would help enable us to remove more data from certain segments, and because there's a lot of data collected via apps and stuff like that, so that could be another reason if we move along with this, but it's not in the sort of short-term roadmap.
I think one thing we need to understand is that even here at Surfshark, we do this. We do collect non-identifiable crash information, which will help us to improve the apps that we create here. And I think it's sort of important to realize that not every data collection is harmful.
Absolutely. And there's a term here that's data minimization. A lot of the apps and tools that we enjoy and get a lot of value from, they do depend on certain information. It can be location information, it can be some usage information, etc. And just enabling them, we do need to collect like some information. And I think another aspect is that it helps keep product teams grounded. So you're not just building whatever you dreamed up last night or in the shower, but you're actually like focusing on creating the best tools for your users, and it can impact your UX UI. It can impact what features you're building. It can impact what features you are sunsetting, because you're seeing that, okay, so we build it, but nobody actually wants it. So I think when it comes to like creating great products, there is aspect to it, and not all data collection just in general is a bad thing.
Yeah, and I think data collection is one thing, but also feedback is another. Whatever you're working on, an art piece, an application, a game, whatever, feedback is super, super important, because with feedback you can develop things that actually people want. Let's talk a bit about Incogni and maybe some questions that people might have in their minds. First of all, how safe is Incogni just in general? Because we spoke a bit about those letters that you guys receive. Will there ever be an event where once an Incogni user starts data removal, they will start receiving various letters from these companies, potentially, maybe asking them like, hey, don't do this or something like that, or some, threatening letter or whatever, or maybe, a lawyer type of question, maybe. Would that ever be the case?
What sometimes happens is that these companies will send an email and say, can you please confirm that you're using, or they will say that, hey, you need extra information and so on. So what we do is we ask our users to actually reply for this request, so we can actually deal with it internally and avoid the situations in the future, because there's actually no good reason for them to be contacting the users directly. At the same time, they do have their information, so like it's not something we can stop.
So in most cases, you won't actually have to put in a lot of input. It will be done automatically.
At most, you should be just forward us the request, and you will take it from there.
All right, awesome. And would there ever be a situation where a legal battle will form, a literal legal battle where an Incogni user, might have to go to court? Did that ever happen? And could this happen?
That's never happened. I don't see a situation where a user might be. At the same time, there might be situations where we might need to fight on the user's behalf. But again, I think it's up for the legal teams to cover the nuance here.
Another question I had was, you guys have a progress timeline, and I was curious, how can we know that the information was actually deleted?
The reality is that from the systemic point of view, we don't. What we can do, so if as a user you want to make sure that, okay, so this company complied, that they said that, okay, so we remove your data. As a user, what you can do is make a data access request to the company. Now, this is something that the user would need to do manually, because for data access, there's actually a layer of identity verification that needs to happen, and I think it's a reasonable request, so that I cannot go to some company and make a data request on your name, and they will send me your behavior, like data and whatever else they have. So there's an aspect, and from our side, we don't want to have this information. We don't want your ID or whatever.
I can kind of see a potential window for maybe eventually this could happen, where maybe you guys could have like an audit team, because the only way to figure out if this information is actually deleted is to audit these drives, whatever the information is. And again, this would take a long time. This whole process would take a long time to just figure out, is this actually gone?
I think it's important to understand that in terms of like data removal costs versus the risks based on like GDPR, CCPA, if the company is then caught lying, the fines would be essentially business closing for many companies. So I think no reasonable company would take that risk.
My last question for you for this show is, what is your motivator to make Incogni, and just what drives you every day when you come into work?
It's a big problem to solve. It's a big problem to solve, and at Surfshark here we're in a sort of quite unique position where we have the resources, we have the know-how to start tackling it, and I think one of the reasons why this problem hasn't been solved yet is that for small startups, it really might be daunting to tackle such kind of problem. And as you mentioned before, there's a sort of like marketing aspect to it where you need to communicate to the users, and not everyone might understand. So there's that aspect. At the same time, we're not that big where we, well, might have other pressures. So I think we are in a sort of like good position to actually tackle this problem, take it head on, and well, do our best to solve it.
I really appreciate you coming on, and I also appreciate your drive and again what you guys are doing, and just making people aware of this issue, because people need to know. I really do think that people need to know. So Incogni.com, sign up and start your fight against data brokers. And we'll actually put a link in the description below where we made a whole video about Incogni and how you can use it and the whole process. So definitely go check it out. So Incogni.com. And as for us, thank you, Dario, for coming on. And I hope you can come in for a future episode, maybe, because this topic is fascinating to me and I want to know more about it. And I'm so glad you came on. And as for us, go check us out on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And that will be it for today. I'll see you next time.